everybody. So if you're with your loved ones, just reach over and pray with them. If there's a friend sitting next to you, do the same. We're going to ask God to do a work in this. I'll let everybody get seated real quick. We're going to continue our series in 2 Corinthians, and we're in chapter 10 this morning, which is a shift that we see in 2 Corinthians. It actually begins a complete new thought. But if you have your Bibles, turn to 2 Corinthians 10. If you don't, there's one in the pew back in front of you. If you don't own a Bible, take that home with you. That's our gift to you. There's reading plans out at the information table, so you can have that also. I was processing through and studying this today. First off, I want to say that if you're available Wednesday night from 6:30 to 7:30, we are starting to open up the sanctuary for prayer. If you want to be a part of that, we would love that. And just come here, 6:30 to 7:30. It's simply prayer. There's no worship. It's just simply prayer. The second thing I was looking through is, as we tackled 2 Corinthians, there has been three different paradigms that we've seen in 2 Corinthians. Chapter 1 through 7 was restoration of relationships. Paul was completely devastated over his broken relationship with the Corinth church, and he began to just kind of share his heart and how that broken relationship devastated him. And you see a side of Paul you don't see in any other book in the Bible where he's just completely almost depressed. He is completely devastated by this broken relationship. Then when you get into chapter 8 and 9, it's about generosity. And then here we get into 10 through 13. And what we'll see is Paul's whole language changes from gentleness to almost a military call. And so you're going to see over the next 3 chapters this language of almost of being enlisted into the Lord's army. And I love it. It's really warrior-like conversations. But before we get into 2 Corinthians chapter 10, what I want you to understand is he gives the keys in verses 1 through 6 of what spiritual warfare is. Many of us have read books on spiritual warfare, and it's not a demon behind every bush. That's not what we're fighting. That's not. The spiritual warfare that we're fighting, and this is clear in what we're going to see over the next 2 weeks, is truth. Truth. And so I began to navigate through these 6 verses, and what I've realized is what has happened in many of our lives is we've created our own truth. It's not matched up with the 66 books of God's inerrant word. It's what we believe is true. And we fight tooth and nail for what we believe is truth. And so let me walk you through how this kind of fleshes out. I have a 2-year-old son, and my 2-year-old son, I've realized that he is just an adult in a baby's body. And what I say that is when we're 2, we don't mask what we want. We don't mask what we want. We just kind of come out and say it. And when we don't get it, we throw temper tantrums. When you get older, you do that internally. You don't get what you want, and you're like, I'm going to take the posture of being above this. And then you just kind of put on this facade until you can't do it anymore. And then your 2-year-old self comes out. So in my 2-year-old son, what I've realized in the toddler age, 2 and 3, the terrible 2s, they really go into 3, you cannot reason with a toddler. And if you're that baby whisperer, come to my house. I'll put $100 down. I shouldn't do this from the pulpit, that you cannot reason with Jaden. Jaden has gotten to this place where he likes to dress himself. And it is embarrassing at times. Last night, he wanted to put his brother's baseball socks on, and they went all the way up, and then he had shorts. He had the socks tucked into his shorts, and he's going out in the neighborhood. I'm like, what am I raising right now? But he wanted to dress himself. And if there's a specific outfit he wants to wear, you can't talk him out of it. You can't. It's impossible. At night, I want to wear specific pajamas. Jaden, they're dirty. You pooped in them. They're dirty. I don't care. Wash them. And he'll sit at the washer waiting for the pajamas to be done. It's like an all-out war. My wife has way more patience with it. I'm like, get in bed. And he's crying. I'm like, I'm going to give you something to cry about, boy. Get in bed. And then you get into food, right? It's if a food touches another food, he won't eat it. It's like you have to make him. And I'm like, oh, no, you're going to eat it. And I'm playing airplane, jamming in his mouth, right? It's like a crash landing with Jaden. But the plate's not big enough. The bowl's not big enough. I want more yogurt. It's nauseating. But my wife handles it with care. But what I've realized in life is this. There's oftentimes God brings truth right down our path. A person will come to you and reason with you why you're in the wrong. And you refuse to submit. You refuse to believe. You refuse to wave the white flag. And I've seen it all the time. How many of you have been in this situation where you believe you're completely right? And you're talking to your wife, you're talking to a friend, and you lay out a case. You've been thinking about this. I'm gonna show them. They make a statement, and you're like, I'm going to show them. You make a PowerPoint presentation, and you invite them over for dinner. You're like, sit down and click. This is why. This is why. And then they come, and they've prepared a PowerPoint presentation. And then it turns into this fiasco, and you're trying to convince them that you're right, and they're trying to convince you that they're right. and there's no way that either one of you are going to move, right? And you agree to disagree unless you're that annoying person who says, no, this is a lifelong mission. I'm going to show you I'm right. See, what I've realized in life, all throughout life, is there's these moments in time where truth, not my truth, but biblical truth, is revealed, whether in your devotional time, in a sermon, or by a accountability partner or a loved one who comes and presents something to you, and deep down inside, you know what they're saying is true. You know. But it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, you're so blinded by your desires, and I'm so blinded by my desires, we can't see any other perspective. We refuse to bend a knee. And so Paul understands this. And he understood this significantly with the Corinth church, that false teachers had gotten in and they have swayed individuals in this church of wrong, of heresy, of the holiness of God, of the simplicity of the gospel, and they have muddied the waters, and people's eyes have become so blind that the congregation began to shift. And Paul is devastated over this. And what I see so often in so many of our lives is this. We look at the 66 books and we pick and choose verses. This fits my agenda. And then if it fits your agenda, you don't care if you take it out of context. You'll use it against your husband or your wife to prove a point. And this is my concern. That Satan has gotten a foothold in truth. And when I look specifically in marriages, and I look at Ephesians chapter 6, I look at 1 Peter 3:7, where live with your wife in an understanding way, or it hinders your prayer life. I see all these texts about wives, submit to your husband as to the Lord, and husbands, lead your wife and wash them in the word. And we know these texts, right? Yet I will submit if. I will love her if. Right? I'll love her if she does this and this and this. I'll do devotions with my family if all the stars align and we kill the truth of what God calls us to do, sacrificially living and dying to ourselves, because our pleasures, our desires dictate what the scriptures really say. And so Paul here navigates through, like, Corinth, I think you're missing the truth of the 66 books. And I see this in marriages. I see it with people in their jobs. I see it in politics. What I see so often is this: her story, his story, and the truth. And you know what's so hard about all this? You really believe you're right. I believe I'm right. I believe I have the right holy anger, the holy righteousness of God to respond in this manner. I believe that this individual's in the wrong, and it doesn't matter what anyone says. We won't look through the lenses of the gospel. We bury our feet, we believe we're right, and we destroy everything in us. I want you to turn to Matthew 7, because I need to have an introduction to this before we get in, because I have to prove my point. Matthew 7, 1 through 6. I did this in staff devos a few weeks ago, not because I thought anybody was struggling with it, but just because that is where I was in my devotional time. And this is what it says: judge not, that you be not judged. So Jesus comes out and says, why are you judging everybody? Do you like it when people judge you? Does that make you feel all warm and fuzzy inside when people look at you and they're condemning you or assuming your motives or assuming all of these things about you? Does that feel good? No, church, it doesn't, right? And Jesus is saying, like, hey, when you judge, you're taking the position of God. Who's the one true judge? God. God the Father. And so we come in these situations in life, and what we do is we climb up on our massive throne, and we begin to say, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. I'm right. I'm right. And Jesus says, you need to be careful. Because if you don't extend grace, there's not going to be any grace extended to you when you mess up. Right? And so what I see often in relationships, we forget that two sinners said I do, or that the person across the table from you is broken, and no grace is ever extended. And a harshness is always portrayed. 7:1, judge not, that you be not judged. And this is what he says, for with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. You want to sit on that throne? Hey, I'm going to sit on a throne one day too. And that same judgment, that hypocritical judgment you pronounce on everyone else, I'm going to pronounce on you. You're being extremely arrogant right now, people. That's what he's saying. Have you guys, and I believe the church is really jacked up in this in a massive way. Like, we go into small groups sometimes, and someone missays something, and then it's like, ooh, a bunch of ravaged dogs jump on them, right? Oh, I didn't mean it that way. Whoa, 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 everybody. We look at other churches. Spurgeon writes a book to the end of his career, where he was teaching people, and he talked to these pastors, and he says, hey, listen, you're going to face criticism. And he taught them how to face criticism. And then he said at the end, now that you know how to handle criticism, don't be critical of others. Don't do what you don't want people to do to you, right? And so what we often do is we have our theology, every jot and tittle, we're completely right. And then anybody who doesn't fit in our little box, we're throwing stones at. And we need to be very, very careful in this. And this is what he's saying. You got to be careful. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye? He goes, you're looking so deeply at your brother, you see the speck in their eye, right? You got something in your eye, bro. But you do not notice the log that is in your own eye. So Jesus is saying, like, you're so concerned about all these specks in all these people's eyes, yet you never look in the mirror. You never see that giant log sticking out that everyone else sees. The pride that everyone sees. The lack of grace that everyone sees. The hypocrisy that everyone sees. You never look and see that giant log that's in your eye. You just refuse to look at it. Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there is a log in your own eye? How can you go to somebody and say, hey, there are things in your life I see when you yourself have not dealt with your mess? I'm not saying that you don't keep anybody accountable, but if you're going to come to the table thinking that you're righteous enough to take the speck out of your brother's eyes, you better be on your knees. And there better be humility in that. And you better have looked in the mirror and said, I've gone to war with my sins. I've gone to war with my struggles. And I'm doing this out of a loving spirit, because most people don't understand this, but look what it says. You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye. He said, you're being hypocritical. You need to do business with the Lord yourself before you condemn someone else to do business with the Lord. See, when I look at taking a speck out of someone's eye, to me, that's a gentle thing, right? Like when my boys come up to me and they have something in their eye, whether it's dirt or whatever it may be, I don't go like this to them, knuckles right in their eye to try to get it out and then start scraping. No, why? I would hurt them. I would do extensive damage, maybe literally lifelong damage. Correct? Church hurt. See it? No, what I do is I get on my knee with my boy, and I say, let me see, and I grab his eyelids, and I pull him back, and I look gently, and then I make sure my nails aren't too long, and I brushly rub against his eyelid to try to get the dirt out of his eye. That's not how we handle conflict. Think about the last fight you got in with a loved one or a neighbor. Like, is that how it went down? You gently got on a knee and say, hey, there's some stuff going on here. Let me navigate through this gently so I don't hurt you or wound you. And why do we look in the mirror and take the log out of our own eye? He says this, and then you will see clearly. Maybe it's not like you think it is. Maybe after you spend a lot of time in the Lord and you're taking all the logs out of your eye, you realize, I was wrong. I played a role in this. Like, I'm so focused on their speck, man. Like, I probably need to go and do some repenting at this moment to that individual and make things right? Because my tendency is not what I want to see this clearly. My tendency is defense. Oh, you want to talk about my speck? Let's do this. But if you really want to see it clearly, what you do is, I need to spend some time with the Lord here. I want to see this clearly. I want to see the vantage point you're coming from. Like, God, obviously there's something on your heart. Obviously there's something going on. I need to navigate through this and see this clearly. To take the speck out of your brother's eye. And this is saying, so you can see clearly, you can gently remove that speck. And this is what he says, do not give dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you. And he's saying there's times in life where you have tried this. You've gone to the altar. You've looked, what role do I play? And you believe you're at a position and a posture where you can gently go and try to take the speck out of their eye, and you've done it for years. But now what he's saying is there's individuals that will turn around and bite you. Hey, here's the thing. If you're thinking of a situation right now where that's happening to you, let me tell you one thing real quick. You've bit people. You, me. We've bit people. People have confronted us with truth, and we show our teeth, right? Okay, it's like that. And we're that little yapping dog, and we finally bite. When they turn their back, we bite their Achilles, and we try to wound them. Because we don't like the truth that they speak. And so as we navigate this, turn back to 2 Corinthians, if you'd be so kind. Paul lays out in this passage, and I'm going to read it really quick. It says this in 10:1. I, Paul, myself entreat you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ. I who am humble when face to face with you, but bold towards you when I am away. That's sarcastic. That's the accusation they made. I beg of you that when I'm present, I may not have to show boldness with such confidence as I count on showing against some who suspect us of walking according to the flesh. For though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but of divine power to destroy strongholds. Paul, as we look in these next few chapters, we're going to see a military type conversation that comes from Paul. Strongholds, do wars, courageous. Paul's reflecting at the end of his life. And maybe some of you don't take that time to do that, but when he's reflecting at the end of his life, the last book he writes in 2 Corinthians and 2 Timothy, he says this, I have fought the good fight. He looks at his life and he realizes every day Satan came at me. Every day he tried to ruin my ministry. Every day he's trying to ruin your marriage. Every day he's trying to captivate your kids' hearts. Every day he's at war with you. And Paul's saying, I fought the good fight. I'm tired. I'm ready to go. It's over. And he's ready to die on the battlefield. In 2 Timothy, in that same book, he's talking to his hearers, and he says this, be good soldiers. You're going to suffer hardships. Right? You talk to people who fought for our freedom, and they come back with PTSD often because they've seen hardships that they never should see. They've seen brothers die in arms. They've seen brokenness, right? And this is what he's saying. When you put on the uniform of Christ, God's called you to fight the battle. There's going to be hard times. There's going to be seasons where it feels like I'm done. You suffer hardships and battles, but don't stop fighting for the one who enlisted you. I know some of you might have shown up today, and man, you're just tired. But you got to look at your general. And he would not give you something that you cannot handle. See, Paul understood this, and all through his ministry, Satan had come at him. And he didn't come at him with small ammunition. He came out to destroy Paul, and Paul understood that. And so we look at Paul's life, and he had Christians in the church slander him. He had friends make false accusations of him and go after his authority and his integrity. He had people who persecuted him. He had people who threatened him. He had individuals who would come in the church and they were jealous and envious of him, and so they would start rumors. He had individuals who would plot to murder him. He had to defend himself against governor authorities and kings and religious leaders and mobs. And on top of that, just the verbal assault, his body reflects all the scars of Satan's attacks. Paul had been beaten 39 times with a whip. 5 times. 39 lashes. 5 times, 39 lashes. His back had the scars of those times where Satan wanted him dead. He'd been beaten with rods, trying to kill him. They say Paul's body was so beat up towards the end of his life, he looked like he couldn't even stand up straight. He had the marks of chains on his ankles and his legs from all the time he spent in prison. He had scars from the riots where they tried to stone him and he was left for dead and he barely survived. He had scars from being floating in shipwrecks in the ocean for days at a time. He had gone through everything that a human being could go through for the gospel, and every morning when he woke up, I'm sure that his body reminded him, when he put his feet out of bed, of everything Satan had thrown at him. And so he addresses the Corinth church here when we look at verse 1, and he understands that these false teachers that he had pushed out of the church with truth would come back one day. Right? You know this. There's times where truth resonates in your heart and you come forward and you repent and you change directions, but then all of a sudden the sin creeps up once again and you fall to it and you succumb to it. And he knew that these attacks on the gospel and the holiness of God and his character would resurrect one day. And he already had this battle with the Corinth church. We talked about this. In 2 Corinthians 2:4, he says this, I wrote to you out of much affliction. And this is the second letter Paul had written. We don't have it. But it broke his heart, and he was very aggressive with the Corinth church, and it broke the relationship between Paul and the Corinthians. This letter caused much depression on Paul. And they repented, but he knew that there'd be an all-out war once again for the souls of the Corinth church. And so then we come into 10 verse 1, and let me show you what he says. He says, it actually starts out in the Greek. It's this word now, which demonstrates a transition. So we have a transition here in 10:1 where it moves to a military language, a new thought. He goes, I, Paul, myself. Paul had been attacked by the false teachers that he had no authority. And what he's saying, this is me, Paul, speaking. I do have authority. And this is what he says. I entreat you. I beg you. This is me, Paul, begging you. Pleading with you. It's this idea of, I don't want to do what I'm about to say I'm going to do. I don't want open conflict. I get no satisfaction in this. I beg you. And he says, I beg you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ. This word meekness is a reference towards humility. He says the humility of Christ, or the patient endurance of Christ. It's free from anger, it's free from bitterness, it's free from revenge. And he's saying this, I, Paul, I beg you in the meekness of Christ and the humility of Christ. And then he uses another word, which is gentleness of Christ, which means lenience. He's saying, I want to come to you in this way. I want to come to you in patience and kindness. I want to come to you with lenience, that maybe I'm misunderstanding what's taking place. But then he uses this word of Christ. See, when we get to these places where truth is hard to navigate through, where you feel like you have a valid point, where you feel like the other person has wronged you deeply, Paul gives us an example on how to approach these situations in humility and with grace. I want to walk you through this because this is the attributes of Christ. See, when Jesus came, he was considered a lamb, gentle. When he was on the cross, he didn't say, Father, Father, please kill them. He said, Father, forgive them. And when we look through all of Jesus' ministry, he held his power back, even though he could have destroyed humanity immediately. But when I look at the scriptures in the 66 books, what brings us to a place where we understand the love of God is Romans 2:4. If we can have that passage up on the screen, it says this. What led us to repentance? That's the question Paul asks at the end of the sentence. What led you to repentance? And this is what he says. Is it not the richness of God? So God's wealthy in these attributes. In his kindness. God's wealth in his kindness. God's wealth in his forbearance or tolerance. And God's wealth in his patience. Is that not what brought you to the moment where you surrendered your heart to Jesus? Is that not what caused you to say, God, I can't believe you love me? Turn your Bibles to Luke 13. This passage has been sitting with me since I came across it a few weeks ago, and I used it at worship night because I think it demonstrates God's patience and kindness. But in Luke 13, there's this parable here. And it says this, and Jesus told this parable. A man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit on it and found none. So this owner of the vineyard comes out one day and he desires a fig, and he comes up to this fig tree and he's like, why doesn't this have any figs? It's a great question, right? And he said to the vine dresser, look, this is like a commanding look. For 3 years now I have come seeking fruit on this tree. I've come to this tree for 3 straight years. And every time I come to this tree, I find none. And this is what he says, cut it down. Why should it use up the ground? That is harsh, right? Like, I've come to this tree for 3 straight years. It's produced 0 fruit. This ground, this fertile soil, I can put another plant here. Get rid of it. Right? So I look at this, and one day God will judge us. We will stand before the Lord and give an account for what we do in this life. But look at the patience of God that keeps going forward. And he answered him, and I believe this is Jesus, Sir, let it alone this year also. Give me 1 more year. I will dig it. I will dig around it, and I'll put manure. Then if it should bear fruit next year, well and good. But if not, you can cut it down. And it's this idea that Jesus comes to the Father, and the Father looks at our life, and he's like, how much longer should I tolerate this? Right? How much longer? And that's a question you need to ask. When can God give up on you? When will you allow him to say, I'm done? Right? Has it been 35 years where he's been digging and digging and digging, and that area in your life has still produced no fruit? Yet Jesus is still saying, 1 more year. God, 1 more year. Give me a shovel. Let me do the hard work. I'll dig up around the roots. I will plant manure. Just give me 1 more year. How many times does God have to send person after person in your life to warn you? How many sermons do you have to sit under? You get what I'm saying? Until you're truly convicted about that sin and you actually come to the altar and you surrender. Why have we become so deaf and hard-hearted and blind? That's the question he's asking. And see, we look at Jesus' patience as weakness. Not love, not kindness. Right? Not that the fact that he's patient with you because he believes in you. How many times has Jesus dug around and put more manure with a godly counselor, a godly mentor, a biblical church, a great small group, that you still just won't grow fruit? See, it's not him, it's us. He has shown us grace and mercy and kindness and kindness. And for some reason, we sit on a judgment throne throwing stones at people. What's wrong with our hearts? So when our wife or our husband or loved ones come at us and we get defensive, our posture should be, you're right, I'm broken, I'm a sinner. He's still working on me. He's still digging that trench around my tree. I'm still trying to allow him to make fruit here. Like, we're so harsh and we're so critical, and Jesus is just not that. He's pleading with the Father, just give him 1 more year. In John 8, you have this adulterous woman, and it appears that they caught her in the middle of the act, and they rip her out of the act, and they bring her before Jesus, and she's probably immodestly dressed, and they're like, hey, look at this. Look at this filthy woman. What should we do with her? Jesus gets down on a knee, and he just starts drawing something in the sand, and he goes, those of you who have not committed a sin, throw the first stone. What happens? The older people realize, oh no. Oh no, I've lived a lot of life. I know what I'm capable of. And the oldest to the youngest began to leave. So the oldest left and the youngers are like, I'm pretty good. Pretty righteous. Should I throw a stone? And they looked at their counterparts, people who they mentored them, and they're like, I probably have some stuff in my life. And then he looks up at her, and Jesus says this, no man condemns you. Is anybody left? Neither do I. Don't do it anymore. Right? This girl who blatantly disregarded the law of Moses, God's holy law. She knew what she was doing. Caught in her sin. Blatantly saying, I know the consequences. I don't care. Jesus generously forgives her. Like, man, there's been times in my life where I'm just like, I don't care. High-handed sin, right? And God still forgives us. Over and over again in the Bible, in the 66 books from Zacchaeus, a man who everyone hated, to Matthew the tax collector who becomes a disciple, to the woman at the well who no one spoke to, that she came out in the middle of the day to avoid people. There's gentleness and meekness in Jesus. All throughout the 66 books, as we read them for decades and generations and centuries, he's shown humanity gentleness and meekness. This is what Paul's saying here. In the meekness and gentleness of Christ, I come to you. I come caring. I come compassionate. I don't want to do what I'm going to be forced to do. And then we come to the end of 1. I who am humble when face to face with you, but bold towards you when I'm away. So there's this accusation that they said Paul is, when he's with you, he's this little quiet dog. So gentle, and they take his gentleness as weakness. But when he gets hundreds of miles away, he becomes a social media bully, right? He's like the yapper dog in your neighborhood. And when you walk by the fence, it's barking, and you're like, man, that thing seems terrifying. And you look over, and you're like, I'm going to kick this thing. You have that type of dog, they're not cute. So truth, I'm speaking truth today. And he's like, hey, he cowers back when he's face to face. This word means weak or wimp. Well, you give him a pin a few hundred miles away, and he's really fierce. He's being sarcastic here. And 2, I beg of you, again, please, don't make me do what I'm going to have to do. That when I'm present, I may not have to show boldness. This word boldness means courageous or conviction. With such confidence as I count on showing against some who suspect us of walking according to the flesh. This word boldness also means this idea, I'm going to abandon all human safety. What he's saying, I don't care what happens to me. I'm going to defend Christ. I'm going to defend Christ. And we're going to talk about this next week. Paul was not thrown in prison by attacking the morality of culture. He was thrown in prison for saying the most offensive thing in that day, that Jesus Christ was the only way. That, hey, Jews, you can't earn it. You actually need Christ. Hey, world, whatever you're worshiping, he's the only way. And they hated him for it. When we speak truth, people who don't have ears fight back. Let's move on. It gets into spiritual warfare now. Next week we'll bring up Ephesians chapter 6, which is one of the best texts on spiritual warfare. But what we have to understand is this: who are we fighting? What are we fighting? Who's our enemy? The person in your marriage is not your enemy. Culture is not your enemy. Right? The demon behind every bush that you think's there is not your enemy. Satan has wrapped our culture in malicious lies. And we've bought it hook, line, and sinker. We preach it in our pulpits. We teach it to our kids. We watch it on television. We listen to it in music. It is all around us, and it has ingrained our mind, and we have not done war with our mind and tested everything to the 66 books. We've bought psychology. We've bought all of this stuff that the Bible's saying, man, it's all wrapped up in satanic things. And then he says this in 3. For though we walk in the flesh, and this is what he's saying. He's not saying, hey, I'm going to come to you in a fleshly manner. He's saying we simply have frail human bodies. Like, I'm just a man. And so we read these spiritual warfare books, and we think we can fight Satan on our own. That's asinine. It's crazy that your voice has power over the demons. The only one who has power in the spiritual realm is Christ, the Spirit, and the Father. They literally go to him in Job and ask for permission. There's an aspect when we look at this, I'm merely flesh, and I'm fighting a spiritual realm. One that I cannot see, one that I cannot fathom, one that I cannot win. I simply have a fleshly body, and our battle is not against flesh. We're not waging war, and this is what this word means. We're not coming up with strategies on how to beat a fleshly human. We are waging war against Satan and his evil forces that want to destroy you, that want to captivate your child's heart, that want to ruin your marriage, that want to create complete chaos in your life. And the problem I run into this, church, I see so many defeated Christians. At times I've been there. Why? Because we try to do it in our own strength. He has given us all these tools to fight the spiritual warfare, yet we want to come up with our own system and process on how to defeat the enemy of God. And so here is what I want to tell you with everything in me. Stop taking a Nerf gun to war. My kids think it's a weapon, right? It can be. It can annoy me to death. I think it may be able to kill me. I'm not certain. But we're like children with Nerf guns. Why? We'll talk about this next week. The one tool God's given us, the one weapon is what? The Bible. His 66 books, his words. So when it collects dust on your bookshelf, you think you're winning? Right? You think you're winning. You think your marriage is going to be okay? You think your kids are going to be okay? I look at this. See, we're not fighting with human weapons. Look what we're trying to destroy. We're going to talk about this in next week. For the weapons of our warfare are not flesh, but of divine power to destroy strongholds, fortresses. What we've done is this. This is my truth. Cinder block, cinder block, cinder block, cinder block, cinder block, cinder block, fortress. It's my truth. I don't care what you say. This is truth. I don't care how much it's hurting you. It's my truth. It's you. And we sit up there on our fortress and we shoot arrows at everyone in judgment. This is my truth. This is my truth. This is my truth. And if you don't believe it, you're wrong. And so many of us have done this. We've built a fortress around this particular sin. We put our feet in the mud or the concrete and we say, this is truth. And we don't align it to the 66 books. And so when the Bible tells us That, hey, if I don't live with my wife in an understanding way, God doesn't hear me. You don't know what she's like. Cinder block it. God, please change your heart. Please change your heart. He doesn't hear you. He doesn't hear you. That prayer will never be answered because you're not understanding where she's coming from. Wives, when the Bible calls us to submit, to be the helper, cinder block, lock, lock, lock. No, you don't know what he's like. Nag, 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 nag. He deserves it. But you're a dripping faucet. That's what the Bible says. He's not going to hear you. He's going to move on the edge of the roof, and you've lost your voice. Right? When fathers, it says, don't provoke your kids to anger. No, you don't know what they're like. I'm going to get on them so hard all the time with no grace and love, and then you wonder why they don't talk to you. When I look through the 66 books, it gives us the answers to relationships. Yet we want to do it our way. We build our fortress, and we believe our truth. And so we can look at sins in our life, right? I can go through and name them. You can make every excuse in the book why you're the way you are. Build your fortress. But man, you're not living in truth. And you're not living out the gospel. And I've done it. I've lived it. I've hurt my wife doing it. And I'm telling you right now, with everything in me, the truth is the 66 books. It's not something you made up. So all of us have built strongholds that we've allowed Satan to create in us a lie that this is truth. And we've hurt people, we've hurt ourselves, we've damaged relationships, we become passive, we become lazy, we justify, we make excuses, and here's the deal. You're defeated. Not because Christ didn't give you the power, not because God's not strong enough, because you've refused to use the tools he's given you. I heard a pastor say this. An old woman came to him and says, I can't serve anymore. My body's falling apart. The only thing I can do is pray. He says this, finally you're useful. You want to bring Satan to his knees? Let the weakest Christian in your home fall on his knees and beg God to do something. You want victory? In that stronghold that you know there's full of lies and there's no truth? Come to the altar and fall on your knees before the Lord and beg with him and plead with him to allow you to have victory. Fight with holy anguish. No, you're going to take the Nerf gun tomorrow and you're going to try to do a war with Satan and you're going to lose again because you're not on your knees and you haven't opened the 66 books. And you're failing because you're not using the weapons God's given you. So you can sit there again like you do all the time where God's trying to dig around your fig tree. You can just sit there and say, oh, I'll do it next week. I'll do it next week. Or you can make a move to the altar today with your wife or with your kids or by yourself and say, I'm done. I'm done. I surrender all. I'm done losing this battle. Let me do it your way. For the first time in my life, I'll do it your way. So you have a choice. And I'm not going to beg. I'm not going to plead. I'm going to ask you to bow your head and close your eyes. If you need to come to the altar, if there's strongholds in your life that you may not even see, maybe you don't see them and you just want God to reveal those strongholds. The only way you'll experience victory is allow God and his truth to resonate in the crevice of your heart. So the altar is open, and let me say this with everything in me. If that stronghold is your salvation and you have not put your full trust in the blood of Jesus Christ, That maybe you believe that he doesn't want you, that he will not forgive you. That's not true. He died for all. He shed his blood for all. And while we were still weak, in our trespasses and sin, he still died for us. If you're the adulterous woman, let him look at you with those beautiful eyes and say, I'm not judging you, sin no more. The altar is open. If you need to talk to me, I'll be up front. But I hope you'll respond this morning and plead with God to break down these strongholds that we so often allow.